We now have a really exciting panel discussion coming up called "Standing Up as a White Ally," which is what I aspire to be in this cause. As I mentioned earlier, as we broke into the program, I want to mention there's some discussion about take a minute is. In running the Bay Area Council, one of the things I get to do is work with a lot of very informed and influential business people, and we hold meetings. And I was at one of our meetings before it started. I was just overhearing a conversation from one of our members who's a senior managing partner at McKinsey, a fellow named Kaiser Permanente, who runs McKinsey in the western United States. He was talking to somebody else, and he's talking about the growth in the U.S. economy over the last period of time, not the last year, but over the time before the pandemic hit. And what he was saying was that the growth in the economy could almost be entirely contributed to the increased participation by women during that time. And they've done I hadn't heard that before, but they've done a lot of work on this, to show that. And we subsequently talked about it. And as I think about Proposition 16, I think there's this sort of a supposition that somehow if we allow minorities to play a bigger part in the economy, it's going to reduce the opportunity for white people to be participatory. It's going to hurt the overall economy, or it's going to be at best a zero-sum game. And I would just put forward that because we've in effect held Black folks and minorities from being fully participatory, there's room for the overall economy to grow once we get beyond that. And affirmative action clearly is a really big part of that effort. You cannot, we will not succeed, as I think was demonstrated in the first panel, unless we really not just allow, but supplement and encourage and figure out creative ways to make sure that minorities are able to fully participate. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator today, who is John Garcia, very well known here at the Bay Area Council and in California. He's the Vice President of Government Relations for Kaiser Permanente, who is sponsoring this event. And John is a very knowledgeable person and a very influential person in our state, with our state government. And we're really pleased to have you moderate the panel. So I'm going to let you introduce the panelists, if that's okay. And we're excited to have this conversation and enjoy the leadership of our sports franchises and affirmative action in Prop 16. So take it away, John.
Thanks, Jim, and thank you for the nice words, and more importantly, the leadership that you and the Bay Area Council, your team, has shown in this area, getting out there early to support Prop 16 is well appreciated, and the wonderful partnership and kinship that we've always had with the Bay Area Council, it's always appreciated. So thanks a lot, Jim. So I have the pleasure here of introducing this group. I feel like a kid in a candy store, long-time Bay Area sports fan. And I'm excited about this, but more so too, because of the role that they play off the field. All these franchises here play a significant role off the field. They give us great joy when they play, and a lot of happiness when they're on the field, but they also take on the responsibility very well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to start off, if you will, with the rookie on the team, Steven Aldrich from the Oakland Roots, a newly formed club here in Oakland, the Oakland Roots Sports Club. They were founded in 2018. And, they are seeking to harness, as they put it here, the magic of Oakland and the beautiful game of soccer as a force for social good. I think that's very well put. And if Steven seems a little nervous, it's not because he's talking to you all. It's because the Roots are in the championship match at 3 o'clock this afternoon. And I think we're going to post the link so you can watch that game. You can pour yourself a pint and watch some good soccer at 3 o'clock. So, Stephen,
thanks,
welcome.
John.
You're welcome. And then Jared Shawlee is the Chief Operating Officer for the San Jose Earthquakes, a longtime fan of the Earthquakes. And he was one of the first major employees by the team that was hired by MLS back in 2008. And they also have a big match tomorrow, the California Clasico, between them and the LA Galaxy. And so you can tune into that one. I guess no longer the rookie, Jed. I remembered when you were first hired as the CEO. It seemed like yesterday for me, 12 years ago. We have Jed York, CEO of the San Francisco 49ers. And during his time as CEO, they've won 2 NFC championships. But he's also involved in soccer. I did a little research here. He's involved with the Republic up here in Sacramento, and then also is involved with the Leeds United club in the English Premier League. So did not know that till I checked a little background on you. So we've got a lot of soccer here. And then, of course, Larry Baer, big Giants fan. And we've loved you since you kept our team here back in '92. You were part of that group that kept them from moving to Tampa. And I can't say thank you enough. Couldn't imagine that happening. And the presence that you've had here, not just on the field, like I said, but what you've done off the field has been fantastic. You became CEO after Bill Newcomb retired in 2012. And you've got a couple rings on your fingers too. So thank you for those. And we really appreciate it. So let me get right into the discussion here. Jed, I'm going to ask you the first question. Back in August, all 7 of the major sports teams came together and in support of Prop 16. Why do you feel like it was important for you all to make this statement and get out there on Proposition 16?
I mean, I think diversity, equity, and inclusion are paramount to our success. And listening to Jim in the preamble about how much women entering the workforce and entering more of the economy has led to essentially all of the gains that we've seen. I mean, that's just one piece of it. And when you look at diverse groups that have been negatively affected in our country, specifically our state, we wanted to do something to have an impact. And, as we like to say, there's strength in numbers in sports, and getting this collective group together with our collective brands to be able to amplify this message and let people know how important this is to us, to our players, to our employees, and to our fans. I think it's very, very important. And I'm glad to be teammates with all of these folks to hopefully make some real needed progress in our state.
Right. So, Jared, next question for you. Were you concerned about perhaps some negative reaction to the statement, getting involved in this initiative?
No, it was actually quite the opposite. By August, we were 2 months into having some really intense conversations internally at the Earthquakes with our staff, with our players, as I'm sure most business leaders were in the wake of the George Floyd killing. And what it kept coming back to was, hey, it's great we're putting out strong words. It's great we're putting out strong statements, but where's the action behind it? And so when this opportunity came, for us, it was this is great. This is something we can actively support. We can use our platforms to create some real action. And I was actually probably more concerned at the time that if we didn't have something like this, the negative consequences from the internal stakeholders of the club would have been something even more. So, we were just thrilled to be able to have some real action to put our platform to use with, and this proposition was perfect.
That's great. That's great. Steven, going to you here. In the history of athletics, there's been a lot of sports, and there's been a lot of activism. Muhammad Ali, of course, in the Vietnam War era, the kneeling protests that we've seen more recently in the last decade or so, most recently the Milwaukee Bucks. Why do you think the two, sports and activism in this area, is so important? What's the tie there?
Yeah, John, I think sport really reflects what we believe society should be, right? Athletes are seen as heroes and representatives of what everyone can achieve with hard work, determination, grit, and they're supposed to compete on a level playing field where people are working on the same team towards a common goal. And when that doesn't happen, athletes can show, whether on the field or off the field, that ideals haven't been lived up to, and they have a platform that gets noticed. I'll give a quick example. even more recent than the Bucks. So in soccer specifically, where in 2 weeks in a row, there was a game between the San Diego Loyal, which is a team coached by Landon Donovan, and a team down in LA. 2 weeks ago, there was a racial slur used against one of the black players on the San Diego team. And the expectation was something would happen immediately, and it didn't. So San Diego forfeited that game and said, look, we're not going to stand for this, even though we weren't in the wrong, we're going to forfeit it. Just yesterday, there was a game between that same San Diego team and another club. And in that game, a player used a homophobic slur against an openly gay player in San Diego. The appropriate action wasn't taken at the moment. So the team at halftime talked about it. And even though they were forfeiting their opportunity to make it to the playoffs, the team walked off the field and forfeited the game. That action is now, with Landon Donovan as a spokesperson, has gotten over 2.5 million viewings of his talk as to why they did that. They were on Good Morning America today. They were on ESPN yesterday. And so the expectation is, things are supposed to play out fairly. And when they don't, athletes and coaches have this platform. And I think the opportunity to step up and show leadership and show this is not okay is why you see athletes and activism so connected.
I appreciate that. And Larry, I'm guessing too, when a lot of teams take the step and get out there, there's some criticism. You probably get some letters about you all should, stay in your lane, not get involved, stay on the field, focus on the game. How do you kind of deal with that? Political science major, Larry. I did not know that back in Berkeley. So how do you deal with that?
Thanks, John, and appreciate it. I think it's a super important discussion and a really important question. I go back to kind of the very beginning of our ownership back in the early 90s. One of the big issues in our community was AIDS, right? And there's a lot misunderstood, and there was a lot of bias and phobias and miscommunications. And reaching certain groups, especially young men, young women who might be following sports. We use the Giants as an agent for awareness around AIDS, create something called Until There's a Cure Day. And the power of Dusty Baker and Barry Bonds and the team, all the teammates, Will Clark, putting the red ribbon on their jersey and going out and forming a ribbon on the field was, an example of using the platform to create awareness in a community. And we didn't have any players say no to that. It was a team effort. I think that, standing up and being identified, it's really hard as an athlete. Certainly we don't require athletes to be political, quote unquote, on our team. But I think everybody sort of in an underlying way, our players and players across all the leagues understand that when you wear the uniform, that says San Francisco or says New York or says Los Angeles, you're representing a community, a diverse community, a community of a lot of people, and to take seriously the obligation to stand up and be identified and stand for something. And we're really proud of players in our league and across all the leagues who are doing that in today's world, even more than ever.
I appreciate that, Larry. And I think I sold you short on your introduction, because you played a key role in that, and you're being modest about it, that you really were a key driver behind, educating folks around AIDS and having that platform where you took full advantage of it and for a good cause. So we really appreciate it from the healthcare standpoint too. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jed.
Jed, kind of going back to a couple months ago after the George Floyd murder, many companies, many organizations got out there and made statements and around fighting for social justice. How did I'm sure your organization took similar actions. I know that they did. Can you talk about how organizations can avoid that performative allyship, the trap of that?
But I mean, I think I don't want to be dismissive to statements, but I think it's clear that the time of statements is done. You know, we made strong statements in the past, and you know, this now is about action. So following the tragic death of George Floyd, you know, we announced publicly our social grant initiative that we are doing $1 million commitment to organizations that we're working with, you know, our players and our staff that come from diverse backgrounds. You know, some of our players, you know, Eric Armstead, Ben Garland, Dee Ford, Solomon Thomas, Laken Tomlinson, and I'm sure there are a couple others that I'm not thinking of right now. But we wanted to make sure that we had a plan that we can go out and be impactful. And we recognize that we don't have all the answers. And we recognize that we can't solve every single problem with one statement or one action. But to me, when our players have asked me, how do we get involved? Like, what do we do? And I try to explain to them, you know, it's what are you passionate about? Like, what do you want to change and where do you want to work? And how can we, as a sports team that has a large balance sheet and connections to local politicians and state politicians and national politicians, how can we help you advocate for things that matter and connect you with the folks that can get it done? I mean, we all have used political consultants in sports. We know them from our times in other businesses. That's not necessarily a world that our players are familiar with. So to be able to connect them with the people that can help them really make change, where you can want something to happen, but wanting and changing a law are two very, very different things. So you have to understand the work that goes into that, and we have to help people get to a place where they can be successful.
Well said. So I'm going to throw out a question, and, you know, let anybody jump out there and answer it. You know, how can other businesses along the lines of what, you know, Jed was sharing, help out and fight for racial justice from your experiences?
Well, John, maybe I'll jump in and start. And I think for me, part of this is, you know, look close to home first. So I think organizations have a duty to internally try to be fair and just. So, you know, are you looking at the way that you hire? Are you looking at the way you promote and you pay? And, you know, those are things that are, you know, core to giving people opportunity right where you are locally. And in addition to those things, and I'll maybe give one or two specific examples in a moment, you'll build forums where you can have a discussion with your staff about how are they feeling, both at work and outside of work. You know, I think this summer has shown that a lot of things that people were experiencing were not okay to talk about in the workplace in the past. And so there's a lot that I think your staff, whether they're people of color, women, have an opportunity to talk about what it is that they can bring to your staff. And then just very quickly on providing the opportunity for those processes around the people to be removed from bias. You know, when you shine the light of day on decisions about how you hire, who was in the interview process, how many people did you interview that were people of color, women, before you made that offer? How do you retain and pay and promote? When you expose those processes and people's logic to the light of day, and you have to have an explanation as to why you're doing something, you find that bias gets rooted out pretty quickly. And so I'd start close to home before I'd start looking outside of an organization to make an impact.
I think,
appreciate that.
Yeah, just building on that, I think that's right. And we have something at the Giants, a DE&I council that has really sprung into action. And I say actions, and was mentioned earlier, and I think Jed mentioned it. I mean, actions are super important because we have issue statements and words matter, but actions are really what are going to matter the most. As we've, we're involved with Proposition 16 as a good example. And just what Steve was saying, I mean, I think internally, you really have to focus on representation, and you have to take it seriously. And you have to look at the complexion of your organization and understand that, especially in sports, it's really important to represent the community in its totality. And I think the Giants individually and the sport of baseball maybe have not done that as well as we could, should, and must going forward. We have, and I think sometimes, whether it's through unconscious bias or not being committed to anti-racist behavior, that sometimes you need assistance. So we're working with some consultants to get us there and just to make sure that best practices are being utilized in that area. And I think that's super important. I also think sharing stories internally, again, staying close to home, just to understand that, how knitted together we are. And we had an all company Zoom several weeks ago, or actually several months ago, after the George Floyd murder, and incredibly compelling. I think it was scheduled for an hour and it went over 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And the discussion was individual Black employees of the Giants, everywhere from a former player who played in the minor leagues 25, 30 years ago to current member of the staff who was in Arizona this spring training, and how they experienced racial bias and inequality and very harsh and unacceptable behaviors. And to be able to shine a light on that internally, I think, is a very healthy thing for an organization, and an action step.
I appreciate that, Larry. And there's no other. I'm going to move on to perhaps the elephant sitting in the room, and this kind of perhaps reflects on a question in our Q&A box here. The panel here is made up of 3 white males. And the Bay Area Council prides itself on being the CEO-led organization of the Bay Area's biggest companies. On the 2020 list of Fortune 500 CEOs, there were only 5 African-American CEOs, and just 1%, despite African-Americans representing 13.4% of the U.S. population. How do we get more diverse, more talent into the C-suites, into sports organizations like yourselves? What can the business community do differently, and how can the Bay Area Council play a role in providing some more equity within the C-suites of all our different organizations here?
To jump in and start on this one, maybe Larry said it perfectly. We all had these Zoom calls or these intense conversations as business leaders with our staffs, and I think if that didn't make us all personally reflect on, hey, I am white, how did I end up in the position I'm in today? Something was probably missed in the dialogue. And so, it's not going to be any one thing. And what you have to get really comfortable with is nobody has the right answer, but we have to try some things. And so we've been spending some time just reimagining the hierarchy of the organization, looking at where those barriers come into place that maybe prevent people of color from reaching the highest levels. And so much of it, I think, starts, at least for us and maybe the other sports teams, at the pipeline, the entry point for talent into the sports world. We have forever brought people in to sell tickets to our sports organizations, and the best ticket sellers get promoted out of there and they rise to the hierarchy. And we've always required a college degree to sell sports tickets. And so you start to look at some of these barriers we put in place, and it doesn't match the skill set needed for the job in our industry. And I think if everybody just takes a second to reimagine the hierarchy of their companies and where those barriers were along the growth trajectory for their employees, you can start to find different spots where we can make some changes and give a more fair opportunity to everybody to climb the ladder.
I think that's awesome, Jared. I mean, and we talk about it all the time here, and the Rooney Rule has not been the most effective in terms of getting more diverse head coaches to be able to move up. And I think one of the things that changed in the NFL, you used to be able to block somebody from anything other than a head coach. Now you can't block somebody to get promoted to a coordinator level. And I realize that's not the same in most other industries where you can pluck an engineer from a different company. But in the NFL, if you want people to be a head coach, you're generally going to require them to be a coordinator. You sort of take the step up. And if you're not stocking the pond with candidates that are clearly able to do it, because if you're saying, I don't want to lose this position coach to go be a coordinator, you obviously think fairly highly of that person. And I think that's one of the pieces that we can do in the NFL and collectively the more we can open the door and stock the pond, and whether that's through our philanthropic efforts of trying to help people in lower socioeconomic areas and trying to get them better opportunities for education. If it's like Jared said, if, do you need a college degree to sell tickets at the box office or to cold call people? Like, you probably don't. Like, how do you train folks to be able to come into your organization and first look and say, we don't represent what we would like to from a diversity standpoint. You have to identify the problem, and then you have to find creative ways to solve the problem and reach outside of your normal network of, we go to this school or we go to, this area to hire. You have to be broader. And, again, when it is all white males on this panel, we all need to do a better job of opening up our networks and bringing more people into our networks so we have a better opportunity for reaching diverse candidates.
Okay. Anybody else? No?
I think maybe John, the 2-second add on both of those awesome answers from Jared and from Jed is some of these roles start with how do you get the education required to be in a position. Some roles don't need certain education, but others, if you're going to be a performance trainer, if you're going to do something that really needs advanced degrees, Prop 16 is one of those areas where if we're able to push this through, it's going to give a broader pool the opportunity to get into that first step, to get into those educational opportunities in the California university system. And so I think there's, from my perspective, what we're talking about isn't quotas, it's how do you give people opportunity, right? The playing field has not been level. So those of us who have power and privilege need to think about what are we going to do to help level that playing field and get outside of the folks that are easy to hire and purposefully hold our people accountable for doing that harder work and looking at what the role really requires. Are we pushing all the way down to the front lines? And then are we bringing in talent from every place it exists? I mean, diverse organizations do better, period. And we should be trying to create as diverse an organization as we can, at every level. And Prop 16 helps out on the educational front, government front, and private sector can do this already. And so I think there's an opportunity though to bring the two together, and we're in a position to make that statement and take those actions.
Yeah, I think that it's really important. I mean, we have, baseball Giants franchise has been around 140 years, right? So 139 years. So you have sort of established a lot of feeder patterns, if you will, over the years. And how do you break those down? I mean, how often have we gone to, say, historically Black colleges to recruit front office personnel as opposed to the more feeder universities and schools and high schools, et cetera? I mean, how much do we sort of get a little bit uncomfortable about, just looking for going to communities that aren't necessarily, providing front office support? I just think there's a lot of opportunity, and I think it's been well said by the other panelists to just think differently about it. And I think if the top-down message can come that way, that we can empower our folks to do that and take some, it's not really, I don't see it as risks, it's opportunity, but those who are working in our organizations in the hiring mode, they feel empowered to go out and do some things differently as opposed to just kind of following along the script of in the past.
Thank you, Larry. I'm going to go to the Q&A box here and invite the participants too. You can certainly send in your questions here. I'm looking at one here directed towards Jed and Larry, but I think you all perhaps can chime in on this one, where if you've had a little resistance from, it says here, white athletes, but perhaps any athlete, right? In regards to some of the, mission or some of the objectives here that you're trying to do in developing social equity and social justice. If you've gotten a little pushback, how have you kind of dealt with it? If you've found yourself in one of those sensitive situations where perhaps folks feel like some of your players or some folks on your staff have felt like you've gone a little bit too far.
I think inevitably you get pushback from fans and folks that may say they're fans in essentially any decision that we make ever. So like, unless you win a championship, and even then you still may get somebody that's negative on you winning a championship. But I think in terms of players, and I'm sure everybody here who's affiliated with a locker room will tell you, I don't know that there's a more open, honest place in a locker room where you either can do your job well enough or you can't. It doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is, what your skin color is, what your religious beliefs are. If you can play and help win on the field, guys respect you. And I think, going back to Colin Kaepernick in 2016, when it started sort of a social movement that this is clearly a link to, our guys had conversations and there was never pushback from people as long as there was open, honest dialogue and conversation. And I think that's the key to this. And I have seen zero pushback from anybody in our organization for trying to do things to advance, any of the issues that we've discussed, not just from a diversity standpoint, but anything that we've discussed openly and honestly, I've never seen pushback.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the standards has to be do the right thing, because you're not going to be able to please 100% of the people 100% of the time, and nor should you. And you need to take a principled approach as an organization. It was a good example of that, I thought, in terms of the locker room, the clubhouse, in our case, when in the wake of the incidents, the racial incidents in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and the Milwaukee Bucks decided not to play a game that night in the NBA bubble. We were scheduled for a game, and we're playing the Dodgers, and Mookie Betts had told his Dodger teammates he was not going to play. And the Dodger teammates all came together around Mookie and determined they were not going to play as well. And when word got to our clubhouse, we had discussions and met with our Dodger, the Dodger players pre-game, discussed it, and we decided we weren't going to play to take an action that was sent. I think the message that was consistent with the organizational message, which is consistent with the do the right thing principle. And so, as Jed said, I mean, the clubhouses and locker rooms do, I think, come together on these principles in powerful ways, and hopefully can advance the ball in terms of public opinion and actions in the broader society.
Yeah, John, we've had similar experiences. I mean, I think one of the things that happens when you have discussions about what people's experiences are, like if you haven't directly experienced racism, it doesn't mean you're immune from its impact. And so having a discussion about the threat to fair society in general is super important. And even if you haven't experienced it, having a teammate tell you about an experience when they were driving home, or tell them about their mom having to shift their pocketbook from one shoulder to the other when someone of color walks in the elevator, like, wait, what? And then you have a discussion about it. Those things really become quite impactful. And I think after you've had a few of those discussions, that interaction with people not like you really breaks down barriers, and that leads to collective action.
Yeah, we actually had a game the same night that Larry was mentioning, and watching the locker room go through the discussions that they had that night was actually one of the most inspiring things. And it's something I wish everyone, because you see, for us, we have 15 players on a roster that aren't from the United States, and they speak 5 languages down there. And within a 30-minute period, they had a discussion on race in America and came to a collective decision that they all supported. And if we could just replicate the locker room environment, I think for other people to have conversations, we'd be in a much better spot, as a society and as a country, because those guys support each other no matter what. And they do end up, like Larry said, ending up, with the right decision.
Thank you. We're going to wrap it up here. Maybe a quick answer from each one of you on another question here in the box. Can each of you kind of talk about something specifically that you all are doing, implementing, at your organization to achieve racial equity and the goals that you've mentioned here? Is there something that you're specifically focused on that perhaps can be used by others here that are participating on this call, and something for them to consider?
I mean, I know for us, it's not like there's some magic formula that you have to conjure up. It's really simple. If you want to hire a diverse workforce, you just have to make sure that that's a goal. And that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to implement that, any position that we're hiring for, we're trying to find diverse candidates. And we're making sure that when we have diverse folks that are working in our organization, we're doing everything that we can to train them. And as everybody here can attest in sports, we don't have the largest organizations. It's not like you have multiple vice president roles. And what we've tried to do is, if we can't promote somebody from within, we try to promote people outside of our organization, and know that if you start as a sales associate and you move to a director somewhere else, you might come back to us as a VP. And we try to do that collectively, knowing that we might not retain all of our talent, but we want to make sure that we are putting as much into our people when they're here to promote them from within or without. And I think that's something that if you care about diversity and people growing in their career, sometimes it means that they may not help your organization directly, and you may have to let them go elsewhere.
Thanks, Jed. Jared, why don't we go back to our initial lineup here? Jared, I'll go to you, and then Steven, then Larry. Well,
yeah, we are making some changes to our entry-level hiring program. I mentioned a little bit earlier, but we do a program called Quakes University, which is like an 8-month manager rotational program for 6 people at a time. And so we are going to codify some percentages of minority candidates that each class has to meet those thresholds. And we'll see how that goes. And I don't know the right percentages, and our management team's working on what those are right now, but we'll try it, we'll adjust, and we'll see where we end up going from there.
Right.
Yeah, we're in an interesting spot. So 90% of our players are people of color, 2/3 of our staff are people of color, 30% are women, our head coach is Black, one of a small handful across all of the pro soccer leagues. So I think we built that in from day one. And now the key is, once you have that opportunity to keep it going, you codify it in the values. I think the piece that we're now doing is trying to look outside of the organization and figure out how do we work with other local organizations and be role models in the community. So it's both providing access of our players and our coaching staff and our front office staff to be out in the community, working with local youth clubs and talking about how did they get where they are. And then we're also trying to use our brand and position to raise funds for both racial and gender equity activities in and around Oakland. So we're trying to now say we always have to maintain vigilance to make sure we keep doing the right thing, as Larry said. And now we're trying to use what we have and pushing it into the broader org, pushing the broader org out into the world.
Larry, you want to wrap?
Yeah, sure. So, and by the way, I'm very inspired by what all the other organizations are doing. I mean, similarly, we really feel that everything we do has to go through a DE&I filter, frankly. And that might not come naturally to everybody in the organization. And while we, even if well-intentioned, we may not have the tools. So one thing I mentioned earlier is we're going to take many people through the organization through sort of a training to be able to be focused on that and to understand what diversity should mean in this organization and how to think about it when we're filling roles or in other activities. We have a large real estate project called Mission Rock that we're in the middle of in early construction phase, and down to understanding vendors and understanding people that we do business with, and how to create diversity in our purchasing. And also obviously at the ballpark at Oracle Park and in all the relationships we have there. So there's sort of a whole checklist of ways that we can incorporate DE&I into our day-to-day rhythms at the Giants. And it sort of starts with the representation. You have to have the representation internally, and we're working hard on that and working hard to break through into some new areas that we just haven't been accustomed to doing. And I think that it's exciting. I actually feel it's exciting and liberating, because we'll be better, and we'll be better representatives of the community when we can get there.
Great. Well, we come up against the hour here, and I know we're a little bit over, but I do want to thank you we could have gone on for a couple hours. I mean, the questions that are in the Q&A box, I think we have the ability to respond separately here. But sorry we didn't get to everybody's question. But like I said, this is an incredible discussion. Your answers, I hopefully hit upon a lot of the questions that may have been in the box there. If not, we'll see if we can't get back to them. Again, thank you. Good luck to the Roots and this evening or this afternoon. And Jim, I'll hand it back to you. I don't know how I do that here, but
you did it. You're
okay.
right.
There we go. Okay.
You did great. Thank you. Great moderation of the panel, to Steven, Jared, Larry, and Jed. Great comments, great insights from all of you, and really appreciate you having coming aboard for this conversation, but even more for what you're doing. I'll take a minute to close. John, you asked the question, what could the Bay Area Council do? Which, certainly is a question we're asking ourselves. And, we want to lead on this, and we want to be a model on it. And it's not that easy, because the way we've been historically set up was we basically try to encourage the leader of an organization, whether it's a sports organization or a bank or a tech company or whoever it is, to join the board. So so it's challenging. So we're taking some actions recently to try to make some changes to, maybe soften the rules on who gets to serve on the board, so that we can look at a broader group of folks. And then we have a new board development committee to literally identify and go out and solicit folks, women and minority leaders, to join the organization, so that they can then in turn serve and bring that diverse perspective and leadership aboard. And I think that's going to be really important for us in the future. We also have we've had and are growing our diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. And at a recent executive committee meeting, we were talking about racial equity, and Jed York raised his hand and he said, I want to be part of that. And so Jed is one of the 3 co-chairs of our DEI committee, with Lady Edos from the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and Jonathan Mays, who's the head of diversity and inclusion for Safeway Albertson. So, we want to use that work from a policy perspective to lead. And Jed's also the chair of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, which is working heavily in the field, and recently hired an African-American leader, Ahmad Thomas, as the new CEO of the group. And we partner with SVLG on a lot of things, and we intend to partner on those issues as well. So, I see a lot of opportunity to move the needle on this, and our members are terrifically interested. Any of these conversations get, kind of big response, big audience, a lot of companies really doing a lot of things. It's really different now than I've ever seen it before. I think this conversation kind of models what happens, and there's a lot of opportunity, and we can't let the opportunity pass us by. I grew up as a kid in the 60s, and I like to reminisce. I watched some old movies, because I enjoy sort of seeing what I saw when I was younger. A lot of us like that. And I look at these movies, and everybody who was anybody in the movies was a white male. The only important people, the only people in the movies who actually did anything were white men making decisions, running organizations, being heroes, and so forth. So, that I think contributed to the unconscious bias that we have. It's not purposeful, but we sort of see, people from my era sort of see the world, I think, in that light. And, I think it's really important to have these conversations, to take the unconscious and bring it into the conscious, and remember, that we're, if we're going to move the needle on this, we have to be aware of our inner feelings and thoughts, and be activists in this movement. And so for the Bay Area Council, there's a lot that we can do, and with your help, we'll be successful. And Kaiser has been a phenomenal partner with us, and thank you and Kaiser for sponsoring this today, and for encouraging us right from the beginning on Proposition 16. So to close, I'll say to folks, dig deep. Take a look at, you heard the earlier panel with Assembly Member Weber and Lydia Chavez talking about the roots of affirmative action, and how we got this kind of bias system that's reasonably unique to California, surprisingly so. And we've got this measure on the ballot. It only hit the ballot in the last couple of months, so it's a very short window of time to get something done. And all of the information we're seeing is that if they can get enough money in the campaign to get the word out, it will move the needle and it can pass, despite early polling that showed initially when people read this confusing measure that people have a tendency to vote no on something they don't understand. So this is a big test. This is a big opportunity in the next 30 days. We're either going to eliminate the effect of Prop 209, or we're going to continue to live with it. That's our choice. So it's before us. Let's change this, and let's do it now. So again, thank you folks for participating, for everybody who joined today, and let's be active with us on the subject as you're being, and we'll make a difference. Thanks everybody, and I want to thank Leslie Alfaro from our team who put all of this together, did a tremendous amount of work. You're a superstar. And did a great job moderating the panel as well as getting things organized. So onward and good luck. And Steven, good luck today. We'll be watching. Take care.
Thank you.